Okay, this video begins the Test 4 material and geometry that's covered on the Math 3 exam review. So Test 4, if you recall, covers factoring. So factoring, the steps to factoring is always check your GCF first, the greatest common factor. So if we look at this particular problem, 54, 18, and 24, the largest number that divides into all three would be 6. Now start looking at your variables. We have x to the 8th, x to the 6th, x to the 3rd. The most you can take out of all of them is the smallest one, or x to the 3rd. Y to the 9th, y to the 6th, y to the 4th. Remember, the most you can take out of all is the smallest, so your GCF is 6x cubed y to the 4th. And now what's left? Well, you divide each term by your GCF, and that tells you what's left over. So 54 divided by 6 is 9. I took 3 x's out, that leaves me 5. I took 4 y's out, which also leaves me 5. So the first term is 9x to the 5th, y to the 5th. Bring down your plus. 18 divided by 6 is 3. I took out 3 x's, that leaves me 3 more. I took out 4 y's, that leaves me 2 more. And there's my second term. Bring down the plus. 24 divided by 6 is 4. I took out 3 x's, there are no more. I took out 4 y's, there are no more. And that's the answer. Normally you would check to see whether you could factor this trinomial further, but because of the mixture of the variables, we know that there's no possible way for that to happen. So you're finished. Problem number 41. Again, factor completely. The first step is to see, is there a GCF in all 4 terms? And if you look a moment, you'll see that there is not. So since there are 4 terms, we know that that means grouping. So we're going to group the first 2 terms, and we're going to group the last 2 terms, and we're going to keep that plus sign in the center. What's the GCF from the first group? Well, that's y. What's left over is x minus 6z. Bring down the plus. What's the GCF from the second group? Well, it's 10, and that leaves you x minus 6z. Okay, we know we've done this correctly because the binomials are the same, so now write your answer by factoring out the binomial, x minus 6z times y plus 10. Neither of these factors can be further factored, so you are completely factored. Okay, factor completely for number 42. It's a trinomial with a leading coefficient. There's many ways to do the problem, but we are choosing to use the AC method. Remember, that means we're trying to find factors and sum. So the factors of 7 times 15, that would be negative 105. Whose sum is the middle term, negative 16. So start thinking about all of the numbers that you can multiply to get negative 105, and you can add to get negative 16. There's only one set of numbers that works. So we keep the first term, and you keep the last term. What we're going to do is rewrite the middle term to be those 2 numbers that make up this particular factor and sum. So if you figured it out, it was going to be negative 21 and positive 5. Negative 21 times positive 5 gives you a negative 105, and negative 21 plus 5 gives you a negative 16. So that is the combination that will fit this factor with that sum. So I'm going to put the negative 21x first and the positive 5x second, because I like to keep the plus in the center here. Because now we have 4 terms, and just like we did in problem number 41, when you have 4 terms, the factoring technique is factor by grouping. So group the first, group the last 2, and factor out the GCFs. So the GCF from the first group is 7x, which gives you x minus 3. The GCF from the second group is 5, which leaves you x minus 3, and write your answer. And remember, you can always check this by FOILing. Binomial times a binomial will give you that trinomial if you factored it correctly. Okay, number 43, another factor completely problem. Here it's an easy trinomial because our leading coefficient here is 1 versus like 42 where the leading coefficient was not 1. So here we're only trying to find out what are things that multiply, what are the factors of 36 that add sum to give you -6. So think of all of the factors of 36. Well, 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 6 and 6. Well, those are all of the factors of 36. And if you look at them, there is not one factor in here that will add or subtract to give you 6. So since nothing factors and there is no GCF, this is prime. Okay, continuing on with the factoring. First thing we do with problem number 44, as with all problems, is see whether or not we have a GCF. And you do here. You see that a is in both terms, so we'll take out an a. It leaves you 81a squared minus 4. You have two terms. Recall that with two terms you have two types of factoring that you can do. You either have cubes or squares. This is a difference of squares, and a difference of squares is factorable. So we will factor that. Square root of 81 is 9. The square root of a squared is a. The square root of 4 is 2. One of the factors is a plus and one is a minus. And that's how you factor the difference of squares. Recall that a sum of squares is not factorable. A sum of squares would be prime. This was a difference of squares, so we could factor it. Okay, looking at number 45. There is no GCF. It's two terms. It's definitely not a square. 64 is a perfect square, but 27 and t to the third are not. So this looks to be a perfect cube. Remember that cubes, both sum and difference, are factorable, and this is a sum of cubes. So we follow the rule. We make a binomial times a trinomial. The first term is the cube root of the first term. Remember, that means what do you multiply by itself 3 times to get 27? Well, that would be 3. And what do you multiply by itself 3 times to get t cubed? Well, that's t. And we do the same thing with 64. What do you multiply by itself 3 times to get 64? Well, that's 4. Once you have these two terms, you fill in the trinomial by squaring the first term, multiplying the two terms together, and squaring the last term. So squaring 3t gives you 9t squared. Multiplying the two terms together gives you 12t. And squaring the last term gives you 16. Notice how I've left the signs empty on purpose. You fill in the signs with soap. Remember, that's the same, opposite, always, positive. So the same is the same as what you started with, so that'll be a plus. This next term will have the opposite of that, so that's a minus. And this last sign is always a positive. Okay, 46 you'll notice is also a cube problem, and this time it's a difference of cubes. Sum and difference of cubes is factorable, so we'll factor this the same way we factored number 45. What do you multiply by itself 3 times to get x cubed? That would be x. And for 343 it would be 7. Fill in the trinomial by square multiply square, so that's x squared, 7x, 49. Fill in the signs with soap, same, opposite, always positive.